The movie begins on July 4th, 1969, in a rural area of America. A celebration is taking place, and amidst this, a young man Mike and a young woman Darling decide to take a drive to a secluded spot. The two are in love and they head there to share some private moments. While sitting in the car, a sudden fear grips them as another car pulls up nearby. However, nothing happens and the car drives away. Relieved, they continue with what they were doing, but once again, the same car returns, raising their fears. When they see the person inside, Darling becomes extremely frightened. In the next moment, the killer uses a gun to shoot and kill both Mike and Darling inside the car. After committing the murders, the killer calls the police from a public phone and informs them, "I have killed two people." The police rush to the scene but are unable to identify the killer. Although the girl Darling dies from the gunshot wounds, Mike miraculously survives. He has seen the killer and knows who it is. 2 weeks have passed since the incident. Now the main character Robert is introduced. He works at a famous newspaper company called The Chronicle. Robert is divorced and has two children, one of whom he takes care of. After dropping his child at school, Robert heads straight to his office. There he meets his senior reporter, Paul. While they are at the office, an anonymous letter arrives. The letter contains no name or address, and when they read it, everyone becomes extremely frightened. The letter says, "On July 4th, 1969, about 2 weeks ago, a murder took place. Mike and Darling were killed. I am the one who did it. If you want, you can confirm it with the police. Check which gun was used." Additionally, there is a puzzle attached to the letter. The puzzle must be published in their newspaper today. The same message has been sent to 2 other newspapers as well. If they fail to do this, the letter threatens to kill 12 more people in the coming week. They couldn't figure out what kind of psycho the killer was, so to confirm, they called the police. The letter mentioned the murder of Michael and Darling that happened 2 weeks ago. The way the gun was used matched exactly with what the police knew. This made it clear that the real killer had written the letter. As they were a little scared, they decided to print the puzzle that the killer had sent in the newspaper. They thought that maybe someone else could solve the puzzle and find a clue, which could help them identify the killer. While doing this, Robert said, "There is no way we will find his name from this." Still, they published the puzzle in the newspaper, thinking it's worth a try. Intelligence agencies, the police, and several others were also sent the same puzzle in hope of finding any clue. After many people tried to solve the puzzle, it was finally cracked by a retired history professor and his wife. They quickly sent the answer to the Chronicle newspaper, and now Paul has received it. As Robert had guessed, the killer's name was not revealed through the puzzle. Feeling a slight impression, they took the letter straight to Robert. The teacher who solved the puzzle read out what they had discovered. The message read, "For me, committing murder is an intense thrill. I enjoy it immensely while doing it. Some people go into the forest to hunt animals, but I find pleasure in hunting the most brutal animal in the world, humans. And there is something else. The souls of the people I kill ascend. After some time, I too will die, and when I reach there, they will be my slaves." Both Paul and Robert found the writing deeply disturbing and saw the killer's twisted mindset through it. However, Robert remembered reading somewhere the phrase, "The most brutal animal is a human." He struggled to recall where he had seen it. At the same time, the killer sent a second letter to the newspaper. In this letter, the killer revealed the name he used to refer to himself, Zodiac. Everyone there was shocked upon hearing that name. After this incident, for the next month, no major issues happened. On September 27, 1969, at a riverside in a place called Napa, 2 couples were sitting together, Ryan and Cecilia. They were enjoying their time when a man dressed in black with a black mask approached them. As soon as they saw him, Ryan and Cecilia got scared. "We will give you everything we have. Please don't hurt us," they said. But the man replied, "I will give you a rope. Tie your husband's hand with it." Cecilia was terrified. She tied Ryan's hands. After that, the killer tied Cecilia's hand as well. He then attacked them with a knife, stabbing both of them multiple times until they were dead. Covered in blood, the Zodiac killer called the police and said, "I killed 2 people near Napa Riverside. Come and get them if you want." The police rushed to the scene, but by some miracle, Ryan survived. Meanwhile, at the newspaper office, Robert was thinking, man is a beast driven by violent thoughts. He remembered reading this concept in a book. That book talked about the brutal nature of humans. It also mentioned a story called The Most Dangerous Game, where instead of hunting animals, humans were hunted for sport. Robert shared this with Paul, suspecting that the serial killer might have been inspired by this book. It seemed like the murders were being carried out according to that idea. The very next scene takes place in San Francisco. Late at night, a taxi driver stops his car when suddenly an unknown man approaches and shoots the driver and kills him. The event is not entirely clear, but 2 children witness it. However, they can't identify the killer as they didn't see his face properly. They immediately called the police. Soon after, the police arrive. The investigation in San Francisco is led by Dave. Dave inspects the scene but finds no evidence. No one saw the killer's face, and when questioned, the children said it was night and the light was dim. We only saw what happened but couldn't see the person's face. The police couldn't confirm whether the Zodiac killer was responsible, but the Zodiac himself confirmed it. He cut a piece of dead taxi driver's blood-stained shirt and sent it to the Chronicle newspaper. After learning about the incident, Dave and his subordinate head to the scene to observe everything. Meanwhile, the killer had sent another letter. When the letter was read, everyone was shocked. Until then, the Zodiac killed adults. He announced that his next targets would be children. One part of the letter stood out. There's a school bus, I will puncture its tire and then kill each child one by one. Reading this made everyone anxious. Even the police were terrified, fearing that the killer would do so. Before this, the Zodiac killer had already sent 3 letters. To verify if all the letters were from the same person, they took the letters to a handwriting expert. After thorough examination, it was confirmed that the same person, Zodiac killer, had written all 3 letters. In the 3rd letter, Zodiac had written that certain things would only happen if the newspaper didn't print his words, so they had no choice but to publish it. After such news came out, the big question was, what will happen next? Would anyone in America dare to send their children to school? A strong sense of insecurity spread. Paul and Robert, along with the police, were desperately trying to find the Zodiac killer. They were looking for any clues but couldn't find anything. Despite their efforts, days passed without any breakthroughs. On October 5, 1969, a call came in. The Zodiac killer was about to speak live on a TV channel. During the broadcast, the channel also invited a doctor named Melvin. As soon as Melvin was informed, Dave hurried to meet him and bring him to the studio. A few days later, the call finally connected, and Zodiac began speaking to the doctor. As he spoke, his voice was loud, designed to scare people. His words were followed by strange noises and growls, making his speech disturbing and annoying. The doctor and others listening couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong with you?" Zodiac responded, "I get severe headaches sometimes. That's when I go out and kill people. It gives me relief." The doctor tried to calm him down and said, "Okay, don't do anything rash. If you come to the place I suggest, I can offer counseling and help you get better." However, the Zodiac replied, "No, I will choose the place and you can come there." He gave a location and Melvin prepared to go, but he didn't go alone. A group of police officers joined him. As they headed towards the location, with sirens blaring, the police in uniform, they waited for the Zodiac killer. Melvin waited for a long time, but the killer didn't show up. So it became clear that the Zodiac killer wasn't going to contact them again. The only thing they heard was a recorded voice. They connected this voice to the Riverside murder where a woman was killed, but the man, Ray, was still alive. When they played the voice for him, he immediately said, "No, this isn't the voice of the man who spoke to me back then. That guy was younger, I could tell from his voice, but this voice sounds like an older man." The police realized that the Zodiac killer had used some kind of application or software to alter his voice during their live conversation. Despite days passing, there were no clues as to who this Zodiac killer was. Neither the media nor the police could figure it out. A month later, Dr. Melvin received a phone call at his home while he was away on a trip. The housemaid answered it, and it turned out to be the Zodiac killer. Since the doctor wasn't available, the killer left a letter for him. When everyone read the letter, they couldn't believe what kind of psycho he was. In the letter, the killer wrote that he had been feeling better recently and didn't have the urge to kill for a while. But as soon as his headaches returned, the need to kill came back. He even mentioned that he planned to kill the doctor next. This psycho had terrified America to the point where just hearing his name sent shivers down people's spines. You must understand, this is all based on real events. The media and the police knew the killer wasn't going to stop playing his twisted game. Something else was bound to happen. In the next scene, a woman is driving along the highway with her son in the car. As they drove, another car approached them. The man in the other car told her that there was a problem with her tire. She pulled over and the man offered to help, telling her not to get out of the car. He tightened the tire and then said goodbye. The woman thought to herself, are such kind people still around these days? She had never met someone like him before. After driving a bit further, the car suddenly got stuck and she realized the tire had come off. At that moment, the man who had helped earlier returned. He offered to fix the car again, and the woman, trusting him, got out, took her child and got into his car. It was a big mistake. As soon as she was in the car, she sensed that something was wrong. His behavior made her feel uneasy. She thought, this man isn't good as he seemed. It's better to jump out and die than stay with him and suffer. So holding her child tightly, she opened the door and jumped out of the car. Luckily, another passerby saw her and rescued her. However, they couldn't prove that this man was a Zodiac killer because no one had ever seen his face. The next day, a letter arrives claiming, I'm the one who did that thing yesterday. Not just that, starting from tomorrow, all the murders happening in this city will be my doing, signed by the Zodiac killer. How is this even possible? Could one person really organize such precise killings? Even if someone is hired to kill, would this be that easy? Robert, along with his senior staff Paul, starts investigating the case. Paul discusses the detail with Robert, who tries to explain what's really going on. A man named Michael and Darling was killed in his car, and 2 days later, a letter from Zodiac killer arrived. Similarly, after an attack on Ryan and Cecily by the riverside, another letter came 2 days later. It seems the Zodiac killer only writes these letters after the news has already reported these events, so in reality, he may not be the one committing the murders. However, Robert is suspicious, especially about the case involving the taxi driver. Robert believes the Zodiac killer might be actually responsible for that one. The letters often include a symbol, a circle with a cross inside, similar to a symbol on the watch brand called Zodiac. The killer seems to have adopted this logo. Realizing these connections, Paul decides to write a detailed article exposing the lies of Zodiac killer. Soon after, Paul receives another letter from the Zodiac killer, warning him that he will be the next victim. The killer, apparently provoked by Paul's investigation, threatens to kill him. Paul becomes deeply scared. This is a serial killer, a madman, he can do anything. Despite his fear, Paul cautiously continues to dive deeper into the case. Paul was digging into a lot of things about him and finally uncovered a secret. It turns out it wasn't in 1969 that he started writing these kind of letters. 2 years earlier, in 1966, he had killed a girl by hitting her on the head and then wrote a similar letter. So, Dave and the police went to the crime scene. After investigating, they found out that a girl named Victoria was hit on the head. And a week later, they got a letter saying, "I did it," but this letter wasn't handwritten. It was typed and said it was meant to be printed. However, back then the police didn't take it seriously. They searched for days but didn't find anything. No CCTV, no witness, no evidences. So how could they find him? And now the same thing is happening. Dave and the police have no clues, so how can they catch the killer? In the end, they gave up on the case. They made it public and told the people, if you see anything suspicious, report it to the police. But after that, many fake reports started coming in. If someone was mad at someone, they would tell the police. So fake reports started to increase. But one day, someone came to Dave's subordinate and told the police something that made them take it seriously. This man said, "My friend Alan used to talk about Zodiac Club before the name became famous." The police also found out that Alan often went to Riverside where a murder happened. After that incident, Alan came back and his neighbor saw a knife with blood in his car and complained to the police. But again, the police couldn't find anything, so they let Alan go. The Zodiac killer had written a letter to the newspaper about killing children on a school bus. Alan had once made a joke about how he would bomb a school bus. Because of this, he was fired from his job at the school. Looking at all this, Dave and the police thought, could Alan be the Zodiac killer? They went to the factory where Alan worked and saw him wearing a Zodiac brand watch. When the police asked him if he was at the riverside during the murder, Alan said, "Yes, I was there, but I didn't do anything. I just visit the place sometimes." No matter how many questions they asked, Alan gave clear answers to everything. But deep down, the police still felt he might be the killer. They decided to compare his handwriting. They checked some letters the Zodiac killer had sent to the newspaper office. They compared these letters with the letter Alan had written to his brother. However, the handwriting didn't match, so they couldn't prove Alan was the killer. At this time, his brother says he writes with both his left and right hands. They quickly check, but the letters do not match. Whether with his left hand or right hand, it doesn't look like what the Zodiac killer wrote. So how can they know he is the killer? While Alan is away, Dave and his co-worker go to the house to look around. They ask, "What do you think?" There's not even one clue. We have no evidence. They find nothing against Alan. Even without clear proof, there are reasons to suspect him. For example, after the Riverside attack, they found a shoe print similar to those used by a Navy person. But they think Alan might have worked in the Navy. They wonder if they can prove that Alan committed the murder, but how many other people could also be involved? In the taxi driver's murder, they found a glove that looks like the one found at Alan's house. But many people use gloves like that. So something happened and they suspect someone. With the evidence they found, they can suspect Alan. But when they ask if there is 100% proof, the answer is no. After a while, the police officers become very tired of the case. Robert and Paul feel disappointed and decide to drop the case. Also, they haven't received any letters from the Zodiac killer for several days. 4 years passed, but the case is still open. Dave's partner has left the case after all this time. Meanwhile, Robert got married again and started a family. He kept a lot of information about the Zodiac killer. One day, while looking through these, he finds that most of the articles were written by Paul. So Paul must know about the Zodiac killer. Also, Paul is scared because the Zodiac killer sent him a letter saying he would kill him. As he can't catch the killer, Paul feels depressed and quits his job. Now he leaves alone. After that, Robert goes to help Paul. Shall we reopen the case and investigate once more? but Paul replies, I can't handle it mentally or physically. You go ahead without me. Standing around here is pointless, so Robert decides to meet Dave. He asks Dave, shall we investigate this together? But Dave, who isn't a policeman, isn't very interested in investigating. However, Robert shares some of the things he has realized during this time. The Zodiac killer's puzzles all come from a book. Anyone who reads that book for a while could make similar puzzles, Robert explains. Dave then says, if you know so much about him, why don't you investigate on your own? Neither I nor the local police are interested. If you want, you could go to Napa and ask the police there. Robert then goes to the police station where the river murder took place. But even there, the police was not interested in the case. They say there are no clues to move forward with. That's a problem. They even suggest why not try another police station. Robert also tries to investigate the case involving the psycho who tried to kill Mike and Darling in the car. The police give Robert permission to read the case report. It turns out that Darling had been followed for some days before the incident, and she was scared when she saw that the person was trying to kill her. Darling's sister had also mentioned this earlier. Mike survived that attack and he saw the Zodiac killer too. Robert quickly goes to see Dave again and asks, Mike is still alive, can you investigate through him? But Dave replies, that case isn't within my authority and I can't get involved much. After that incident, Mike disappeared, probably out of fear. Dave asks, why are you still chasing this case? Do you remember the doctor who said he would speak live with the Zodiac killer? Robert remembers, yes, Dr. Melvin. The Zodiac killer had called him. Robert was advised that he could visit the doctor and ask his questions. So he quickly went to Dr. Melvin's house, but the doctor was not there. The servant there then suggests that Robert either wait for a while or leave. Robert, however, refused to leave and decided to stay. He waited for 1, 2 and then 3 hours. The servant eventually asked again why he was waiting so long and what he wanted. Robert explained that several years ago, a psycho had called the doctor and he had come to ask about the incident. Hearing this, the servant revealed that Psycho had actually spoken to her. That surprised Robert. He asked if the Zodiac killer had really spoken to her. The servant confirmed that the caller had wanted to talk to the doctor but ended up speaking to her instead. The man had said his birthday was on December 18 and that killing someone on that day would make him happy. This frightened the servant, but she had gathered a crucial clue from the conversation, the Zodiac killer's birthday, that was December 18. With this information, Robert returned home. Later, he received a mysterious phone call. The caller didn't reveal their identity, but informed Robert that the Zodiac killer's name was Rick Marshall, and to find him, Robert should speak to Rick's friend Bob. The call was cut off abruptly. Robert then started looking into Rick Marshall and found that he used to make posters. Robert took these posters to a handwriting expert to compare them with the letters sent by Zodiac killer to the newspaper. The expert found some similarity in the writing, but said that more posters were needed for a definite match. To get more posters, Robert contacted Bob, who agreed to show them to him on a particular day. When Robert was preparing to visit Bob, his wife expressed her concern, telling him she had noticed how obsessed he had become with the Zodiac killer case. She feared for their family's safety if anything happened to him. Despite her concerns, Robert told her that he couldn't stop now. He didn't need to punish the killer, but simply wanted to identify him. Later, Robert went to Bob's house. Bob seemed willing to provide some posters, but his odd behavior made Robert suspect that he might be a psychopath. Bob suggests they go to the basement to get more posters, and though Robert was scared, he followed him. After collecting the posters, Robert left quickly, relieved that nothing bad had happened, even though he had feared the worst. When Robert returned home, he found that his wife had already left with their children. However, Robert was determined to find the killer. No matter what happened, he was firm in his decision that he would not stop until he catch the culprit. Later, Robert went to the sister of the woman called Darling, who had been murdered. She was the one who had given the statement to the police, saying that before her sister's death, someone had been bothering her. Her sister had spoken about this man several times. Robert then asked if she remembers the man's name. She replied that it was something that happened 4 years ago, so she could not recall the name anymore. Robert, however, suspected that the man could be Rick Marshall, as he had once received a mysterious call that suggests this person was the killer. The sister thought for a while and then recalled that the man's name was Alan. Robert was shocked and wondered if it could be Alan. Although he initially had doubts, after hearing more about Alan's behavior, it seemed likely that Alan was the killer. Robert, with the help of his wife, managed to find Alan's ID card, and when they checked the birth date, it was December 18. This date sounded familiar to Robert because years ago, a doctor named Melvin had received a call from the patient who claimed it was his birthday, that he intended to kill someone that day. That birth date was also December 18. Realizing the connection, Robert quickly went to meet Dave. Robert was now convinced that Alan was behind the Zodiac killings. But Dave was not interested in the case. He showed Robert a letter he had received a few days earlier, which was from Alan. In the letter, Alan mentioned that if anyone needed help with Zodiac killer case, they could contact him anytime. Robert explained that for past 4 years, there had been no communication from Zodiac killer, and during that time, Alan had been in jail. Now he had recently been released. Additionally, the sister of Darling had also given a statement that Alan had been bothering her sister multiple times before her death. Despite all this information, Dave remained disinterested. He told Robert that they had once suspected Alan to be the killer, but after following him for several days without finding any evidence, they dropped the case out of frustration. Dave concluded that he was not willing to chase Alan again, as he didn't want to face another disappointment. A few days later, Robert went to the supermarket where he saw Alan, the man he suspected to be the Zodiac killer. He stood there looking into Alan's eyes for a while, but neither of them spoke. Robert later told his wife that he had no desire to punish or harm Alan. All he wanted was to look into his eyes. That moment convinced Robert that Alan was indeed the Zodiac killer, though Alan continued to walk free without being caught. Years passed. About 10-20 years after this event, on August 16, 1991, during the investigation into Darling's murder from 1967, the police found Mike, who had survived the shooting by the Zodiac. When they showed Mike several photos, he pointed towards Alan as a man who attacked him. However, Mike wasn't fully certain and said he could only be 90% sure. The police kept investigating the case until 2004, but they couldn't still identify the Zodiac killer. Eventually, in 2004, they closed the case. To this day, American authorities haven't discovered who the killer was. By the time the case closed, the police had 3 main suspects: Arthur Lee Allen, Earl Van Bus Jr., and Lawrence Kane. Van Bus Jr.'s son had even expressed his suspicion that his father might be the Zodiac killer, citing his father's brutal nature. However, none of these men could be confirmed 100% as the Zodiac killer. Till this day, none of these men could be confirmed 100% as the Zodiac killer. And this case remains a mystery till this day.